On April 3, 2019, David and Rebecca Langford, both 34 years old, met inside the Charlotte offices of Brenner, Devlin and Sue LLP to initiate probate proceedings following the recent death of their father, Walter Langford. Walter, a retired textile executive, had died 3 weeks earlier, leaving behind an estate valued at approximately $4.2 million, consisting of cash holdings, a mixed commercial residential real estate portfolio across 3 counties, and full ownership of Langford Import Group LLC, a modest but solvent trade business. Walter's will, dated November 4, 2015, named both his children as co-beneficiaries, with equal division of all liquid and fixed assets. The will included specific instructions for the sale of the family's lake house and the winding down of the business. Rebecca, a physical therapist based in Raleigh, had been in regular contact with her father during his final 18 months. David, by contrast, resided in nearby Huntersville and maintained only occasional communication during that same period, citing personal and professional conflicts. Tensions surfaced during the initial legal consultation. David expressed discontent with the equal split outlined in the will, claiming Rebecca had re-entered their father's life only to manipulate an old man into reversing course. He referenced a prior 2009 draft of the will that granted him 70% of the estate and positioned him as sole executor. The attorneys noted that version had been formally revoked. David nonetheless insisted the 2015 document was tainted, and soon retained separate counsel to challenge it on the grounds of undue influence and diminished capacity. By mid-May 2019, David had filed a formal motion in probate court to stay all disbursements pending a handwriting analysis of Walter's signature. The court acknowledged the request and scheduled an evidentiary hearing for July. In the meantime, David began referring to his sister in legal correspondence as the adverse party and requested that all communication go through attorneys. Simultaneously, Rebecca petitioned the court for limited release of estate funds to cover funeral costs and debt resolution. Her attorney included hospital records showing her father had maintained legal and mental clarity up to his final week. She also presented logs of her near-weekly visits to Walter during the final year of his life, supported by phone GPS data and hospice staff statements. By June, informal communications between the siblings had broken down completely. David began sending Rebecca a series of messages, later entered into evidence, in which he warned her to walk away now before it gets worse and accused her of desecrating our father's memory for profit. On June 23, 2019, Rebecca filed for a temporary restraining order citing escalating verbal hostility and veiled threats. The TRO was granted with a 30-day review window. Unbeknownst to authorities at the time, David had begun selling off personal property. Between July and September, he liquidated a vacation cabin in Asheville and listed his BMW 740i for sale in a private transaction. Bank statements showed a series of withdrawals totaling over $48,000 in cash, some in denominations of $50 bills. Investigators would later identify these withdrawals as the early financial groundwork for a murder-for-hire arrangement. Phone records confirm that on August 14, 2019, David Langford placed a call to a prepaid mobile number registered to R. Tiernan, Royce Tiernan, a man with prior convictions for assault, firearms violations, and narcotics trafficking. According to Tiernan's eventual grand jury testimony, that first conversation lasted just over 6 minutes and included the phrase, "I have a family problem I need solved discreetly." By late summer 2019, David Langford had moved from legal opposition to lethal intent. Between September 20 and October 11, 2019, David Langford met 3 times with Royce Tiernan, a former associate with a known criminal history, including 2 prior convictions for assault with intent and illegal weapons possession. Meetings took place at neutral public locations across Mecklenburg County, including a truck stop off I-77, a parking lot behind a shuttered bowling alley in Pineville, and the back lot of the Red Roof Inn off East Woodlawn Road. According to testimony later provided by Tiernan, the first meeting was initiated by David through a prepaid mobile phone. David opened the conversation by reiterating that his sister Rebecca was attempting to steal half of everything he had worked to secure. He described her as a manipulative opportunist who had no right to anything but a goodbye. Tiernan initially believed the call was an angry vent, until David asked bluntly if he knew someone who could remove a problem quietly. In their second meeting on October 3, 2019, the discussion turned explicitly criminal. David offered $35,000 in total, $10,000 up front and $25,000 upon completion of what he called the cleanup. He instructed that the incident be made to look like a robbery, suggesting that his sister was a routine-driven person and wouldn't see it coming. Tiernan expressed hesitation but agreed to pass the request to a trusted third party, someone more experienced and further removed. That individual was Ramon Ellis, a 38-year-old with ties to Tiernan through past criminal ventures in Georgia. Ellis had prior charges for armed robbery, weapons possession, and assault with intent. While never convicted of homicide, his arrest record suggested familiarity with violence for hire. On October 7, Tiernan contacted Ellis and relayed David Langford's offer. Ellis requested logistical details and emphasized the need for predictability and speed. David Langford supplied Rebecca's routine through encrypted messaging on October 9. He listed her address, employer, gym, and grocery store, along with the fact that she volunteered at a church-run food pantry every Thursday evening, typically returning home around 6:50 to 7 p.m. A surveillance period followed. On October 23 and 24, Ellis drove from Atlanta to Charlotte in a rented 2011 Nissan Altima using false identification. Security footage and toll logs placed the vehicle near Rebecca Langford's townhouse on both evenings. Ellis later confirmed that he observed her arrival patterns and verified she came home alone, parked in the same space, and often carried groceries. On November 3, 2019, David Langford met Tiernan one final time in the parking lot of a Lowe's home improvement store near Concord Mills. David delivered an envelope containing $10,000 in cash, composed primarily of $50 bills. A photograph of the cash bundle, later recovered from Tiernan's phone, showed it wrapped in a rubber band and labeled 11/7 confirm. The date referred to the planned day of the murder. The evening of Thursday, November 7, 2019, was dry and seasonably cool, with temperatures in Charlotte in the low 60s. Rebecca Langford finished work at 5:30 p.m., stopped at Harris Teeter for groceries at 6:12 p.m., and pulled into her driveway at 6:57 p.m. As she exited her vehicle, she was approached by Ramon Ellis. According to his later confession, Ellis said nothing. He raised a concealed .22 caliber revolver and fired a single shot into her chest from close range. The bullet entered just below the left clavicle, puncturing the subclavian artery. She collapsed immediately. Ellis retrieved her purse and phone as staged props to simulate a robbery and fled in the waiting rental car. At 7:11 p.m., a neighbor called 911 after finding Rebecca unresponsive. Paramedics arrived within 5 minutes but pronounced her dead at the scene. Her keys were still in her hand. Initial assessments by CMPD considered robbery. However, the method, single close-range shot, no signs of struggle, keys and car untouched, raised immediate doubts. The murder had been swift, silent, and premeditated. Rebecca Langford's death, initially classified as a possible robbery-homicide, was formally assigned to the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department's Homicide Unit under Case No. 19-1107H. Detectives Lisa Romer and Curtis Hale were primary investigators. Their initial steps included a neighborhood canvass, surveillance footage review, and forensic sweep of the scene. Rebecca's body was found in front of her 2013 Toyota Camry, driver's side door ajar, grocery bags intact on the passenger seat. She had suffered a single gunshot wound to the upper chest, fired from close range. A .22 caliber hollow-point bullet was later recovered from the interior door panel. The absence of a shell casing pointed toward a revolver. No signs of physical struggle were evident, and her purse and phone were missing. Despite these signs, detectives noted key inconsistencies with typical robbery patterns. Rebecca still held her keys in her right hand, suggesting she was targeted as she exited her vehicle. Nothing else of value appeared to be taken, including a laptop in the back seat and an envelope containing $180 cash in the glove box. No eyewitnesses observed the shooting directly. However, a neighbor remembered seeing a dark sedan idling down the block 15 minutes earlier. The autopsy, conducted November 8, confirmed the cause of death: massive blood loss from a perforated subclavian artery. Time of death was consistent with the 6:56 to 6:58 p.m. window. Toxicology was negative. Minor bruising to her forearm suggested a brief defensive motion. Detectives turned to background and motive. Interviews with Rebecca's co-workers, neighbors, and church associates revealed no recent threats, relationship troubles, or financial distress. However, nearly all mentioned one recent and consistent point of stress: the ongoing inheritance dispute with her twin brother, David Langford. On November 10, Romer and Hale interviewed David at his Huntersville residence. He appeared composed but aloof. He confirmed their strained relationship and acknowledged legal conflict but denied recent communication with Rebecca. When asked about his whereabouts on November 7, David claimed he had been driving around to clear his head, offering no specific locations or witnesses. The conversation was noted for its detached tone. Suspicion grew as detectives examined David's financial history. Subpoenaed bank records revealed two large cash withdrawals: $5,000 on October 16 and another $5,000 on November 2. Further inquiry showed David had sold a secondary vehicle on October 10 in a private sale, receiving $9,000 cash. These amounts coincided with statements made by Tiernan and would soon be corroborated. A breakthrough came from a separate incident logged the same evening as Rebecca's murder, a minor hit-and-run at 8:14 p.m. on West Boulevard involving a dark-colored Nissan Altima. The vehicle was later discovered abandoned in a lot behind a shuttered fast food restaurant. Inside, forensic technicians recovered a single black latex glove, a grocery receipt timestamped 6:42 p.m. from the same Harris Teeter Rebecca had visited, and a .22 caliber round in the trunk. Fingerprint analysis from the driver's side window returned a match for Ramon Ellis, a known associate of Royce Tiernan. Ellis had an extensive record in Georgia, including armed robbery and illegal possession of a firearm. Investigators traced the rental car to a shell company in DeKalb County with known ties to Tiernan's network. CMPD issued a statewide BOLO, "Be on the lookout," for Ellis on November 13. On November 15, acting on a tip from a motel manager in Rock Hill, South Carolina, U.S. Marshals arrested Ramon Ellis without incident. He was found in possession of $3,800 in cash and a loaded .22 caliber Smith & Wesson revolver. Ballistics later confirmed the bullet recovered from Rebecca Langford's body matched the firearm in Ellis's possession. Ellis waived initial counsel and requested to speak with a homicide investigator. What he said would unravel the rest of the conspiracy. Ramon Ellis was processed at Mecklenburg County Jail on the evening of November 15, 2019, charged with first-degree murder, unlawful possession of a firearm by a felon, and obstruction of justice. On November 17, Ellis's public defender contacted the district attorney's office to initiate a cooperation agreement. In exchange for full disclosure and testimony, Ellis sought prosecutorial consideration. A formal proffer agreement was signed on November 19. During a videotaped interview with detectives Lisa Romer and Curtis Hale, Ellis confessed to shooting Rebecca Langford. He confirmed being hired by Royce Tiernan and acting under a contract arranged by David Langford. According to Ellis, he was promised $25,000 to carry out the murder, with an initial $3,800 paid in cash after the act. Ellis stated he drove to Charlotte on November 6, conducted a final visual sweep of Rebecca's property, and waited near her driveway the following evening. He used a rented Nissan Altima, parked several houses down. When Rebecca exited her vehicle, Ellis approached with a concealed .22 revolver and fired one round into her chest. She dropped instantly. He took her purse and phone to simulate robbery and fled, disposing of the items in a commercial dumpster behind a retail strip on Tryon Street. That location was later searched, and forensic teams recovered fragments of a burned purse and a damaged iPhone, later confirmed to be Rebecca's via serial number. Ellis stated he had no personal knowledge of Rebecca and only communicated with Tiernan. He also provided details of a second planned payment that was never delivered due to his arrest. He identified photographs of David Langford and described the envelope in which the initial $10,000 was delivered. On November 21, CMPD arrested Royce Tiernan without incident. During his initial interrogation, Tiernan denied involvement. However, upon learning of Ellis's full confession and plea arrangement, he agreed to cooperate in exchange for reduced charges. Tiernan corroborated the timeline. He admitted David Langford had first approached him in August 2019, during a conversation described as heated and impulsive. Over several weeks, the plan evolved into a contract killing. Tiernan confirmed receiving $10,000 in cash from David in a Lowe's parking lot and forwarding $3,800 of it to Ellis post-murder. He retained the balance to handle logistics, including vehicle rental and disposable burner phones. Digital forensics backed their statements. Text messages retrieved from Tiernan's encrypted messaging app included multiple communications from David, including one sent at 7:43 p.m. on the night of the murder, "Is it done?" and "We need silence now." CMPD re-interviewed David Langford on November 23. Detectives presented financial transaction data, recovered messages, and testimony from Ellis and Tiernan. David remained stoic but evasive. He denied all involvement and demanded legal representation. The interview concluded after 17 minutes. On November 24, a Mecklenburg County grand jury returned a 9-count indictment against David Langford. 1 count of first-degree murder. 1 count of conspiracy to commit murder. 1 count of solicitation to commit a felony. 1 count of criminal use of a communication facility. 1 count of obstruction of justice. 4 counts of accessory before the fact. He was arrested the next day at his office without resistance. David Langford was taken into custody at 11:06 a.m. on November 25, 2019. During booking, he remained silent, providing only the legally required biographical data. Officers described his demeanor as flat, unreactive. Bail was denied at arraignment on November 27 due to the capital nature of the charges and risk of witness tampering. By the end of that week, the entire conspiracy had been exposed. David Langford's arrest on November 25, 2019, for the murder of his sister Rebecca triggered an immediate wave of public shock in Charlotte. News coverage emphasized the betrayal at the core of the crime, a twin brother, facing equal inheritance, who orchestrated his sister's death to seize financial control. The story quickly spread beyond local headlines, covered by national networks within 48 hours. At his arraignment on November 27, Langford was formally denied bail. The court cited the calculated nature of the crime, the use of intermediaries, and substantial digital evidence linking him to the murder-for-hire arrangement. His defense attorney, Michael Perino, entered a plea of not guilty and stated the defense would vigorously contest the characterization and admissibility of the prosecution's evidence. In the weeks that followed, the prosecution team, led by Assistant District Attorney Carlin Gwynn, filed their trial framework. The state confirmed its intent to pursue life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Although the charges met the criteria for capital punishment under North Carolina law, the DA's office declined to pursue the death penalty, citing the strength of forensic and testimonial evidence as sufficient for a non-capital conviction. Simultaneously, the state finalized plea agreements with both co-conspirators. Ramon Ellis, the shooter, pled guilty to second-degree murder and unlawful possession of a firearm. His deal included a 27-year sentence with a mandatory minimum of 22 years served. Royce Tiernan pled guilty to conspiracy to commit murder and obstruction of justice. He received an 18-year sentence, eligible for parole after 12, contingent upon full cooperation in courtroom testimony. These agreements were formally entered into the court record in mid-December 2019. The public response remained intense. Friends and colleagues of both Langfords described them as polar opposites: Rebecca, community-oriented and reliable; David, quiet and withdrawn. Some who had interacted with David during the probate process recalled his demeanor as strangely hostile and borderline obsessive about fairness and control. The media seized on additional revelations from the investigation. Among the most disturbing were notes recovered from David's office, handwritten figures outlining estate value scenarios, estate tax impact, and a page reading, "No Rebecca equals 2.1 M net." Prosecutors filed the notebook as Exhibit A for premeditation. In early January 2020, defense counsel filed multiple motions seeking to exclude encrypted text messages obtained from Tiernan's phone. Perino argued that the software used to recover and decrypt the messages constituted a violation of Fourth Amendment protections. The court disagreed. On January 22, Judge Miriam Cole ruled the messages admissible, stating they had been acquired under a valid warrant and processed through a court-authorized forensic lab. David Langford appeared in court again on February 18, 2020, for a formal pre-trial hearing. He wore a navy suit and remained silent throughout. Jury selection was scheduled for March 16. Outside the courthouse, members of Rebecca Langford's former church group held a small vigil. They carried signs reading, "Justice for Rebecca," and "Blood should not buy inheritance." The trial of the state of North Carolina v. David Langford began on March 16, 2020, in Mecklenburg County Superior Court. The presiding judge, Miriam Cole, had ordered tight security and partial media restrictions due to high public interest and the emotionally charged nature of the crime. Jury selection had taken 5 days and resulted in a panel of 10 women and 2 men, with 3 alternates. Prosecutor Carlin Gwynn opened for the state with a stark claim: David Langford, frustrated by a fair inheritance, had engineered his sister's murder for financial gain. "He plotted, paid, and profited," she said. The prosecution presented a sequence of evidence tying David directly to the crime. Encrypted messages. SBI cyber specialists recovered deleted text conversations between David and Royce Tiernan using court-authorized decryption tools. Key messages included, "Her routine is fixed, Thursday night. No excuses," and, "Post-murder, did it happen?" These texts were allowed into evidence over the defense's objections following a pretrial ruling. Financial records. Transaction logs confirmed David withdrew $10,000 in cash in 2 installments. Surveillance from ATM cameras confirmed the timing. A forensic accountant testified that David sent estate attorneys emails urging immediate liquidation and dispersal of assets within 3 days of Rebecca's murder. Testimony from Tiernan and Ellis. Both men testified under plea agreements. Tiernan described in detail how David initiated the murder plot and provided the cash. Ellis gave a vivid account of the killing, stating under oath, "I was paid to end her life. I pulled the trigger. She never had a chance." Planning evidence. Investigators recovered a spiral notebook from David's home office labeled "Scenarios." It included estate projections with and without Rebecca's share, including a note reading, "No R equals full control." David Langford did not testify. His defense attorney, Michael Perino, attempted to undermine the co-conspirators' credibility, suggesting they had incentive to lie in exchange for lighter sentences. He portrayed David as a passive, grieving sibling manipulated by criminals. Then came the twist. On day 14 of trial, March 30, the court received an anonymous envelope containing 5 printed photographs. The images showed David Langford at a Charleston, South Carolina marina on the afternoon of October 17, 2019, the same date the prosecution alleged he met with Tiernan to finalize the contract. The photos were time-stamped by a dockside ATM camera and later confirmed authentic. David was alone, wearing the same jacket seen in other verified images. The defense introduced the photos the next morning. Prosecutors were taken off guard. They had relied on a misattributed cell tower ping that previously placed David in Concord, North Carolina, that day. Forensic review revealed the ping was misclassified due to tower overlap, a rare but known error in rural-to-urban transitions. Judge Cole granted a 1-day recess. While the alibi photos cast doubt on the timing of a key meeting, they did not alter the broader timeline. Tiernan had referenced early October or mid-October in his initial statement, and other evidence, including digital records, witness testimony, and financial behavior, still supported the charge of premeditation. Closing arguments resumed April 1. Prosecutor Nguyen told jurors, whether the final handshake was on the 17th or the 10th, the plan was David Langford's. The greed, the money, the motive, all his. The defense leaned heavily on the photos, implying the state had built its timeline on unstable ground. On April 10, after 9 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict. Guilty, first-degree murder. Guilty, conspiracy to commit murder. Guilty, solicitation to commit a felony. Guilty, obstruction of justice. Guilty, accessory before the fact. Judge Cole sentenced David Langford to life imprisonment without parole. She called the case a clear execution of intent, one planned not in haste, but in cold arithmetic. The photographs, though genuine, did not exonerate him. Instead, they served as a reminder of the calculated lengths he had gone to in preparing an alibi. David Langford's conviction for orchestrating the murder of his twin sister Rebecca marked the conclusion of the criminal trial, but its consequences extended well beyond the courtroom. In the weeks following his sentencing in April 2020, the Langford estate proceedings were formally reopened under North Carolina's Slayer Statute, NC General Stat Section 31(3), which disqualifies any person who unlawfully kills another from receiving financial benefit from the victim's estate. On June 12, 2020, a probate judge ruled that David Langford's share of the estate would be permanently forfeited. Rebecca Langford's entire portion, which amounted to $2.1 million in liquid assets and partial real estate, was transferred in accordance with her last written directive to the Central Carolina Pediatric Rehabilitation Fund, a nonprofit where she had volunteered. Her home was later sold, and proceeds also donated to the same foundation. David Langford, inmate #NC843206, was transferred to the Alexander Correctional Institution, a maximum security facility in Taylorsville, North Carolina. Prison records indicate he remains under restrictive housing due to high-profile case status. He has received no visits since 2021. His only registered contact is a maternal cousin who handles minimal legal correspondence. Meanwhile, Royce Tiernan and Ramon Ellis began serving their respective sentences at separate state correctional facilities. Tiernan was placed at Foothills Correctional Institution, with parole eligibility scheduled for 2031. Ellis, who received 27 years with a 22-year minimum, remains in Central Prison in Raleigh. Prosecutors have stated they will contest any early release motions filed on either man's behalf. Public and media interest in the case persisted. In late 2021, a 3-episode podcast titled Inheritance: The Langford Murder was released, drawing more than 500,000 listeners within its first 2 weeks. It featured interviews with detectives, legal experts, and members of Rebecca's church group. The series received critical praise for its focus on motive, family fracture, and legal process. One unresolved element of the case remains the anonymous delivery of the Charleston Marina photographs during trial. Despite efforts to trace the source, no fingerprints or DNA were recoverable from the envelope. The image timestamps were authenticated, but no clear origin was ever found. A sidebar inquiry conducted by Judge Cole concluded the photos were not fabricated, but their intent, whether to exonerate or confuse, remains unknown. In 2022, legislation was introduced in the North Carolina General Assembly to streamline electronic records access during homicide investigations, citing the Langford case as a primary example of both the value and vulnerability of digital timelines in court. The memory of Rebecca Langford has been actively preserved. Her former employer established the Langford Integrity Award, given annually to healthcare professionals working in underserved communities. A scholarship fund bearing her name was launched by her alma mater, North Carolina State University, aimed at students pursuing physical therapy. On March 10, 2024, the 5-year anniversary of their father's death, a small private memorial was held at Lake Norman, where the Langford siblings once spent summers. A plaque was placed near the shoreline. In memory of Rebecca Lynn Langford, 1985 to 2019. A life ended by betrayal. A legacy of care, courage, and truth. The Langford murder remains one of North Carolina's most sobering examples of familial collapse, a case where inheritance, entitlement, and grievance merged fatally. Though justice was served, the shadow of what was lost continues to linger.